June 1945 Atlantic Ocean. German prisoners of war aboard United States. Transport ships, no named commanders, over 400,000 prisoners transported. The sea stretched 1,800 miles, a grey void beneath a heavy sky. German prisoners of war, once Wehrmacht soldiers, Luftwaffe pilots and Kriegsmarine sailors, stood crowded on a converted freighter's deck. Their uniforms, worn thin by battle, clung damply in the salty air. Captured amid Europe's collapsing fronts, these men now faced an unknown fate. The ship's engines hummed at 16 knots, driving them toward America, a land they had fought against. Fear sharpened their thoughts, cutting deeper than the ocean wind. Whispers spread among them. Would they face punishment or forced labor? Germany surrendered on the 7th of May 1945, leaving them defeated. Now they were captives bound for an enemy's shores. Over 400,000 prisoners, logged by United States Army records, filled such ships. They formed no single unit, a mix of infantry, aircrews and sailors, their ranks erased. No officer led them. Their command structure had dissolved in surrender. United States Navy crews ran the voyage, sailing from ports like Cherbourg, France. The journey's 1,800 miles felt endless to men packed in steel holds. Rations of 7 ounces of bread daily staved off hunger, but not dread. Bunks stacked 4 high groaned under restless bodies as waves rocked the ship. Memories of war, from Ardennes snow to Hamburg's ruins, blended with fears of what lay ahead. German prisoners spoke quietly, their adversaries' view clear. "Americans will punish us for our nation's war," some muttered, echoing Reich propaganda. The Third Reich had cast the United States as merciless, yet these men knew little of their captors' plans. United States Army guards carrying M1 rifles kept order with brisk commands in English, a language few understood. Their new status was undeniable. They were no longer soldiers, but prisoners stripped of control. Medical checks every 72 hours at sea prevented disease in tight quarters. Such care surprised some, expecting neglect. Engine maintenance every 24 hours kept the ship on course. The United States government had set their path, though the prisoners remained unaware. They would not sit idle in camps, but work on farms, in factories, rebuilding infrastructure. This decision, driven by post-war labor needs, gave their voyage purpose. The prisoners, imagining starvation or brutality, knew none of this. The ship held steady at 16 knots, narrowing the gap to a land they could not picture. Would they find cruelty or something unexpected? The question lingered relentless as the waves against the hull. The number that matters is distance. 1,800 miles divided them from their past. Each mile widened the gap between their old selves, soldiers of a lost cause, and their new reality. As land appeared a faint line on the horizon, their pulses quickened. America loomed not a battlefield, but a place of captivity. The journey's end promised answers, yet for now they stood in suspense, men without a nation sailing into the unknown. The ship reached New York Harbor on the 15th of June 1945 under a pale morning sky. The Statue of Liberty stood tall, its copper form a silent greeting to the German prisoners of war. Over 400,000 strong, these men gazed at the monument, their first sight of America. Once soldiers of the Third Reich, they now wore tattered uniforms, damp from the sea. Germany's surrender on the 7th of May 1945 had left them captives of the Allied forces. The United States, their former adversary, held their future. Uncertainty weighed heavily, sharper than the chains they had feared. Would they face retribution, labor, or worse? The question pressed upon them as they stepped onto American soil. United States Army records counted over 400,000 German prisoners arriving that summer. They were no single unit, but a blend of Wehrmacht infantry, Luftwaffe pilots, and Kriegsmarine sailors, their ranks dissolved. No commanders guided them. Their military order had collapsed in surrender. United States authorities processed them at ports like New York and Norfolk, directing them to camps nationwide. The journey's 1,800 miles had severed them from their past lives. Now they faced a new existence shaped by America's post-war needs. Rations of 8 ounces of bread daily sustained them during intake. Barracks, not dungeons, awaited them, a surprise to those expecting cruelty. Prisoners whispered among themselves, voices thick with doubt. "Americans will grind us down," some said, repeating fears from wartime propaganda. The Third Reich had portrayed the United States as vengeful, a land of punishment, yet these men knew nothing of their captors' intentions. United States Army Guards, armed with M1 rifles, maintained order with quiet precision, issuing orders in English. Most prisoners, unable to comprehend, followed gestures to navigate their new surroundings. Medical screenings every 48 hours kept illness at bay, a measure that startled those braced for neglect. The number that matters is their total: over 400,000 men, a vast logistical task. The United States government had decided their role before they arrived. They would not languish in camps but work filling gaps left by war. Farms needed labor, factories required hands, infrastructure demanded repair. This plan, born of necessity, turned enemies into workers. The prisoners, unaware, pictured harsher fates: starvation, torture, or endless confinement. Their emotions ran raw. They were no longer soldiers but captives, their identities fractured. Guilt clashed with fear. They had fought this nation, yet now stood on its ground. Could they trust their captors? Would dignity replace humiliation? These questions gnawed as they boarded trains to camps. Trains departed every 12 hours, carrying prisoners to destinations across the country. The efficiency mirrored the ship's steady 16 knots, a reminder of their new status. Some prisoners, peering through barred windows, saw America's expanse: fields, towns, highways, unlike Europe's war-torn ruins. Others grappled with their place in this land. They had sought to defeat the United States. Now they would aid its recovery. Tension mingled with curiosity, a strange blend in their guarded hearts. As camps drew near, their future came into focus. America, once a distant enemy, was now their reality, its intentions still unclear. Trains rolled into camps across America, their wheels screeching against steel tracks in June 1945. German prisoners of war, over 400,000 in number, disembarked under the watchful eyes of United States Army Guards. These men, once soldiers of a fallen Reich, carried the weight of defeat in their slumped shoulders. Their journey of 1,800 miles had ended, but a new chapter began in places like Camp Ruston, Louisiana, and Camp Como, Mississippi. No longer on battlefields, they faced a different challenge: labor for their captors. The air buzzed with tension as they entered barbed wire enclosures. Would work mean suffering, or could it bring something unforeseen? The question lingered sharp in their minds. United States authorities assigned the prisoners to tasks vital to the nation's recovery. Over 400,000 men, scattered across 500 camps, worked on farms, in factories, and on infrastructure projects. They harvested crops, repaired roads, and assembled goods, filling gaps left by mobilized American workers. The scale was immense. Records show prisoners contributed millions of labor hours by 1946. Rations included 10 ounces of bread daily, supplemented by vegetables and meat far exceeding their expectations. Barracks offered beds with thin mattresses, a stark contrast to the mud and rubble of war. Medical care provided every 72 hours ensured their health, surprising those who anticipated neglect. The number that matters is labor output, millions of hours by 1946, sustaining America's economy. Prisoners expecting brutality found conditions tolerable, even humane. United States Army regulations, aligned with the 1929 Geneva Convention, mandated adequate food, shelter, and care. Some camps allowed prisoners to send small earnings up to $3 monthly to families in Germany. This gesture stunned men who had braced for punishment. Yet suspicion lingered. Americans use us for their gain, some whispered, wary of their captors' motives. Their labor was mandatory, their freedom gone, but the absence of cruelty unsettled their preconceptions. The prisoners' days began at 6 in the morning with roll calls under floodlights. They marched to fields or factories, tools in hand, under M1 rifle-armed guards. The work was grueling, picking cotton under Louisiana's sun, welding steel in Ohio's plants, but not torturous. Breaks came every 4 hours with water and shade provided. Some prisoners, former farmers or mechanics, found tasks familiar, even grounding. Others, like ex-Luftwaffe pilots, struggled with manual labor's demands. All shared a common realization: their efforts fueled the nation they had fought. This paradox stirred unease, yet the routine offered stability, a faint echo of purpose. As weeks passed, the prisoners settled into their roles. They were not free, but they were not starving. The camps, though enclosed, lacked the horrors of European battlegrounds. Some men began to question their fears. Could this labor, this treatment, reshape their view of America? The answer was unclear, but the reality of their days, work, food, rest, challenged the propaganda of their past. For now they toiled their hands, rebuilding a land they once aimed to destroy, their minds wrestling with what it meant. Summer 1945 deepened, and German prisoners of war toiled under America's wide skies. Over 400,000 men spread across camps from Texas to Wisconsin worked daily, their hands shaping the nation's recovery. These former soldiers, once bound by the Third Reich's cause, now hoed fields, laid bricks and mended machinery. The journey of 1,800 miles had brought them to this labor for a former enemy. In camps like Camp Perry, Ohio, and Camp Opelika, Alabama, they faced not only tasks but also their own fractured identities. Were they still soldiers, or something else? The question simmered quiet but persistent as they navigated their new reality. Among them, men like Erich Müller, a former Luftwaffe pilot, carried memories of dogfights over Berlin. Captured in April 1945, Müller arrived at Camp Swift, Texas, expecting harsh retribution. Instead, he found barracks with clean cots and meals of 12 ounces of bread, beans, and occasional meat. The United States Army, adhering to Geneva Convention standards, ensured prisoners received care medical checks every 72 hours, clothing replaced monthly. Müller, like others, felt a jolt of disbelief. "Americans feed us better than our own army," he confided to a bunkmate, his words heavy with confusion. Such treatment clashed with the Reich's tales of American cruelty. Suspicion held firm at first. Prisoners, hardened by war, distrusted their captors' motives. They worked under Guard M1 rifles glinting in the sun, their freedom a memory. Yet, as days turned to weeks, cracks formed in their certainty. Farmers among them, tending crops in Iowa's fields, saw parallels to their homeland's soil. Mechanics fixing trucks in Michigan factories found rhythm in familiar tools. The labor, though forced, was not punishment but contribution. This realization stirred unease. How could they aid a nation they had fought? Guilt tangled with relief. They were alive, fed, and working, not suffering in chains. The number that matters is earnings $3 monthly sent to families, a lifeline. This small act, permitted by United States policy, reshaped some prisoners' views. Müller, sending money to his mother in Hamburg, felt a flicker of purpose, however faint. Others shared his conflict, their identities caught between enemy and worker. Some resisted, grumbling during 12-hour shifts, but most adapted, driven by survival and routine. Interactions with guards, though limited, grew less tense. A nod, a shared cigarette, hinted at humanity beneath the rifles. For many, the war's hatred began to blur, replaced by the daily grind of labor and rest. By August 1945, prisoners noticed America's vastness beyond the barbed wire, endless fields, bustling towns glimpsed from train windows. They were not free, but they were not broken. The work, the food, the unexpected care forced them to question their past beliefs. Could an enemy show kindness? The thought was unsettling, yet undeniable. As they toiled, their hands calloused, but their minds active, they began to see America not as a monolithic foe, but as a place of complexity. The path ahead remained unclear, their captivity a constant, but something shifted within them, subtle yet profound. By late summer 1945, German prisoners of war numbering over 400,000 had settled into America's labor camps. Their hands calloused from months of work, harvested wheat in Kansas, repaired railroads in Georgia, and built levees in Arkansas. The journey of 1,800 miles had faded into memory, replaced by the rhythm of labor under America's sun. In camps like Camp Concordia, Kansas, and Camp Dermot, Arkansas, these former soldiers faced not only tasks, but also fleeting glimpses of American life. Guards with M1 rifles remained ever present, yet moments of human connection began to pierce the divide. Could enemies find common ground? The question hovered faint, but growing as prisoners and captors navigated their shared reality. Work brought prisoners into contact with American civilians, a surprise after months of isolation. Farmers in Iowa overseeing prisoners picking corn offered nods of approval for their steady pace. Factory workers in Pennsylvania, sharing tools with prisoners, repairing machinery, exchanged brief words about the task. United States Army rules allowed supervised interactions, ensuring prisoners contributed 13 hours daily to labor efforts. Meals, now including 14 ounces of bread and occasional fruit, sustained them, while medical checks every 72 hours maintained health. Such provisions, mandated by the 1929 Geneva Convention, stunned prisoners who had expected starvation. "Americans treat us like workers, not enemies," one prisoner murmured, his voice low with disbelief. The number that matters is labor hours over 10 million by late 1945, rebuilding America's infrastructure. These hours, logged by United States authorities, reflected the prisoners' discipline, a trait that earned grudging respect from some captors. Civilians, initially wary of the enemy, noted the prisoners' efficiency. A Kansas farmer watching prisoners stack hay remarked on their precision honed by military training. Prisoners in turn observed Americans' openness so unlike the Reich's rigid hierarchy. Some learned English phrases from guards during breaks, trading words for cigarettes. These exchanges, small and cautious, chipped away at wartime hatred, revealing shared humanity in the shadow of conflict. Prisoners like Erich Müller, laboring at Camp Swift, Texas, felt the shift. Müller, once a Luftwaffe pilot, now repaired fences alongside local workers. A Texan, handing him a wrench, asked about Germany's winters, sparking a halting conversation. Müller's distrust softened, though guilt lingered. He had bombed Allied cities, yet now shared tools with their people. Other prisoners shared this tension, their labor tying them to America's recovery while memories of war lingered. Some, teaching German folk songs to curious guards, found pride in small acts of cultural exchange. Others, receiving letters from home via earnings of $3 monthly, felt torn between loyalty to Germany and gratitude for American care. As autumn neared, these encounters grew. Prisoners still captives began to see America beyond propaganda, a land of hard work, diverse voices, and unexpected kindness. Civilians, once fearful, saw not faceless enemies, but men who toiled diligently. The barbed wire remained, but its meaning softened. For the prisoners, the question was no longer just survival, but understanding. Could they, former foes, belong to this strange new world even briefly? The answer was unclear, yet each shared moment, each word, each task, built a fragile bridge across the divide. Autumn 1945 cast golden light over America's labor camps, where over 400,000 German prisoners of war toiled. Their hands, hardened by months of effort, picked apples in Michigan, welded pipes in Illinois, and cleared debris in Tennessee. The 1,800-mile journey that brought them here felt distant, overshadowed by the daily grind. In camps like Camp Atterbury, Indiana, and Camp McCain, Mississippi, these men, once soldiers of a defeated Reich, worked under United States Army oversight. The myth of brutal American captivity, sown by Third Reich propaganda, began to crumble. Could enemies become collaborators? The question took root, reshaping their view of the land they labored for. United States records show prisoners logged 15 million labor hours by October 1945, fueling post-war recovery. They worked 13 hours daily, harvesting crops, repairing bridges, and assembling goods, their efficiency undeniable. Meals of 15 ounces of bread, meat, and vegetables sustained them, while medical checks every 72 hours ensured health per Geneva Convention rules. Some prisoners sent $4 monthly to families in Germany, a privilege that stunned men expecting cruelty. "Americans gain our work, yet give us dignity," prisoners whispered, their adversaries' perspective shifting. They had feared starvation and torture. Instead, they found structure, food, and purpose challenging their deepest beliefs. The number that matters is earnings, $4 monthly, a lifeline to shattered homes. This policy, enacted by United States authorities, gave prisoners a stake in their labor, however small. Men like Erich Müller at Camp Swift, Texas, felt the change. Müller, once a Luftwaffe pilot, now built irrigation ditches alongside American farmers. Their shared sweat blurred the line between captor and captive. Other prisoners, teaching card games to guards or learning baseball, saw Americans as individuals, not faceless foes. These moments, fleeting but frequent, dissolved, the Reich's tales of a ruthless enemy. The prisoners' labor, once a source of guilt, became a strange point of pride. They were rebuilding, not destroying. Americans, too, reconsidered their views. Civilians, watching prisoners work with military precision, admired their discipline. A Mississippi foreman overseeing prisoners laying tracks noted their skill rivaled local crews. Guards, once stern, shared stories during breaks, their M1 rifles less menacing. The prisoners still confined felt the shift. They were not free, but they were not broken. Their labor tied them to America's future, a paradox they could not ignore. The barbed wire, the rifles, the camps remained, yet the hostility faded, replaced by a cautious mutual respect born of shared effort. By November 1945, the prisoners' understanding of America had transformed. They saw a nation of vast fields, bustling towns, and people who valued work much like themselves. The myth of a cruel enemy lay in ruins, replaced by a complex reality. They remained captives, yet their labor gave them purpose. Their interactions gave them insight. For some, America was no longer just a foe, but a place where enemies could coexist, even contribute. The path forward was uncertain, but the change was undeniable. Their captivity, once a sentence, now held unexpected meaning. Winter 1945 blanketed America's labor camps, where over 400,000 German prisoners of war worked on. Their hands, rough from months of toil, cleared fields in Virginia, fixed machinery in Illinois, and laid tracks in Oregon. The 1,800-mile journey to America now seemed a distant memory. In camps like Camp Shelby, Mississippi, and Camp Grant, Illinois, these former soldiers faced their final days as captives. By mid-1946, repatriation neared, signaling a return to Germany. What would they take from this unexpected chapter? The question hung, quietly shaping their thoughts as they prepared to depart. United States Army logs show repatriation began in May 1946, sending over 400,000 prisoners home. They left behind 18 million labor hours, a vital boost to America's recovery. Their last tasks demanded 15 hours daily harvesting crops and repairing roads under M1 rifle-armed guards. Meals of 15 ounces of bread, meat and vegetables kept them strong, with medical checks every 72 hours ensuring health. Some sent $4 monthly to families, a final act of care from their captors. Their work had rebuilt farms and factories. Their presence had shifted views, both their own and those of Americans. The number that matters is labor hours 18 million by 1946, a legacy of effort. Men like Erich Müller leaving Camp Swift, Texas, carried more than memories. Müller, once a Luftwaffe pilot, had built ditches and shared tools with locals, seeing America as resilient, not cruel. Other prisoners echoed this change. Some, swapping stories with guards, found common ground in work. "They were foes, yet gave us bread," one said, his words tinged with awe. These bonds, forged in labor, softened war's hatred, leaving lasting impressions. Some prisoners stayed, applying for residency by 1947. United States records note thousands joined the workforce, becoming farmers and builders. Those returning to Germany shared tales of America's vast fields and kind acts. A few, like Müller, later resettled in America, drawn to places they once worked. Their stories, captured in letters, show enemies turned contributors. Americans recalled the prisoners' discipline, their labor easing post-war strains. By 1948, the camps were gone, but their impact endured, proof that even foes could build together.